welcome again, everyone. I want to start with making a few remarks on the objectives of this panel, to present my co-moderator as well as our distinguished panelists, and to reiterate the format for today's panel. The objective is quite simple, and it is to begin a conversation on financing. We cannot accomplish anything meaningful in 2.5 or 4, or even if we had the whole day. But I believe that we can begin this conversation. I will take a cue from Mr. Luben Marinov in saying that the schedule envisages that financial close for this project happens somewhere in 2025, maybe the second half of 2025, and I purposefully will not state the date which is in the schedule, because truly it is obviously much more important to get everything right than to mechanically tick a box. So this is the objective, and this is for the benefit of the project, meaning all stakeholders in the project. First and foremost among those, of course, is the project company, which is being tasked with the gargantuan task to structure and deliver this project. Why we want to have this discussion now is, well, one, to support the project companies in objectives with regards to financing conversation, but the second, and I'll be remiss if I not mention this, is to demonstrate that we have learned some lessons from the past. It was mentioned a few times that we did try to build a new nuclear power plant in the past, the BelAtom nuclear power plant. And I want to emphasize that I'm quite proud of what our industry and our government did in this project on the technical side. On the project structuring side, I cannot share that same sentiment. And in fact, I do believe the project failed precisely because the financing of the project was not thought through, perhaps accounting for all the risks, some of which materialized during the project development. So, without wasting any more air time, I will start by introducing Mr. David Stearns, my co-moderator. He is a banker with extensive experience in nuclear, and also experience with Bulgaria dating back to more than 20 years. And right now we are very pleased to have him in his role as a member of the strategic advisory group of the implementing organization for IBNI, the International Bank on Nuclear Infrastructure. And we'll hear more about that during the panel. We have 9 panelists, and it's quite a blue ribbon panel. I believe that we have probably collectively more than 250 years of experience between the 9 panelists, experience in banking and in nuclear, and between many of the people, experience particularly with Bulgaria. So this is quite remarkable and quite valuable, I believe. We have Mr. Petju Ivanov, the Chief Executive Officer of Kozloduy Nuclear Power Plant New Builds, the project company. But in addition to him, I want to point your attention, we pretty much have a full board from KMPP New Builds on the first row here. We also have the Bulgarian Energy Holding on the first row here. So I hope this is signal enough, in addition to the remarks made by Minister Malinov and President Radev on the first day, that we mean business. So we want to get down into some practical conversations, practical advice. Next we have Mrs. Lazarina Bataklieva, who is currently with Worley, and she is a nuclear engineer by training, who is now leading the feasibility assessment business of Worley, and she has participated in the work on BulAtom over many years, and also work in Saudi and in Egypt. And next we have Mr. Paul Murphy with more than 40 years of experience in the industry. His career spans Bechtel and White and Case and Nuclear Engineering Consulting Group, and he's truly one of the foremost people in nuclear project development and structuring worldwide. Mr. Vince Zabielski is a partner at Pillsbury, and he was in a role as a senior legal counsel at ENEC on Baraka for several years. He's one of those people who combines the technical with the legal, being a mechanical engineer by training. Online, we have Mr. George Borovas, who is the head of nuclear at Hunton Andrews Court, LLP. He's also on the board of the World Nuclear Association. And he is also someone who has very deep and extensive experience and expertise in international nuclear energy transactions, and in particular financing of new nuclear. I don't believe, there you go. We do have Mr. Valentin Scheider from the European Bank on Reconstruction and Development. He is someone very intimately acquainted with the Bulgarian reality, having been involved with the decommissioning program through the Kozloduy International Decommissioning Support Fund for many years now. Mr. Miloš Stefanovic from Citi is a managing director of their power practice based in London. We also have Ms. Suchi Sundaram from JP Morgan Chase, a VP focused on infrastructure investment banking. And finally, we have my co-conspirator in coming up with the idea to have such a panel at this year's conference, Mr. Milko Kovačev, former Minister of Energy of Bulgaria, with experience in the EBRD, most recently the IAEA, and currently, like David, one of the people behind this wonderful initiative to create a bank which specializes in nuclear IBNI. With that, I just want to say a few words on the format, and then I will give the floor to each of the panelists for their brief introductory remarks. So we'll try to contain those in about an hour. So 4 or 5 minutes each is what we expect from the panelists, so that we have ample time for the fire chat style discussion that we want to have among the panel, but also with active participation from the audience. Mr. Ivanov.
Благодаря, господин Манчев. Maybe I need to switch in English. So once again, thanks a lot, Mr. Manchev. Dear co-panelists, dear colleagues, I do think that financing of a nuclear project is a bit of mystery right now throughout the whole world, because it causes a lot of challenges. And certain part of these challenges, we need to find the solution for them. But what we believe that there is a way for that. Kozloduy nuclear power plant new build is definitely in the beginning of this process, securing the financing. But if I need to go back to Mr. Manchev's words, we do have lessons learned, because we know what happened on the BulAtom project, where we had already placed the orders for long lead items, but on the other hand, we didn't have the financing structured, and we didn't have also the shareholder agreement signed between the National Electricity Company and our partner from RVE. Definitely, this is something that for the project of new build 7 and 8, we're trying to avoid, which means that for the time being, we have been secured to equity, which will be enough to cover our expenses related to the ongoing engineering process. We're about to sign an engineering contract with a consortium between Westinghouse and Hyundai. And as a result of this engineering process, we expect to receive a lot of deliverables, but the most important for the financing arm of the project would be that we need to have the CapEx fixed and also the OpEx projected. In the meantime, we need to have all the negotiations with the financial institutions brought to its end to put into the equation the financial expenses. And this, of course, put into the financial model will give us where the levelized cost of energy for the project goes and how the projection of the markets of the time the operation, the power plant would be operational would fit into the market. In the morning session, there were even questions, what are we going to do with the energy? Do we see some additional schemes, either CFDs, PPAs? And my deputy CEO definitely answered the right question that everything is on the table. It is initial process, but for us, we're considering different options. We acknowledge the importance of financing because, on the other hand, we could recognize that we live in some tough times related to financial costs. We're experiencing the highest financial costs in the past 20-25 years. And we did have we expect the expectation that these rates would go down. We were more positive on that at the end of last year, the beginning of this year. But what we see now, the Fed is doing, they are not going to blink that quickly. And of course, this puts some pressure on the financial costs that any investor needs to put into the financial equation. We saw also, on the other hand, that ECB just yesterday triggered and they decreased with 25 basis points the interest rates in Europe. But what we see as a policy from the European Union, we are not able to have the shoulder of European Investment Bank, no EBRD for new builds in the nuclear field. And as I recognize that Mr. Scheider is here on the forum, we would need also to understand what he could share with us would be the policy of EBRD on that. And can we expect some, let's say, renaissance on the nuclear, but also related with the firm financial support coming from the European Union? So I'm not trying to steal the time from my partners, and I'll pass the word to Mr. Manchev. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Batoklieva.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Манчев. Аз употребих много време да си превеждам речта на български. Ако не възразявате, ще говоря на български. Първо с няколко думи да кажа за компанията Worley. Както знаете, тя е международна компания с главен офис в Австралия, като е специализирана в областта на големи инфраструктурни проекти, в областта на енергетиката и добива и преработката на нефт и газ. Компанията има два ядрени офиса, един в Маркал, Канада и нашият софийски офис, нещо с което сме много горди. Наскоро бяхме обявени за Center of Excellence за компанията. В София имаме около 200 повече от 200 високо квалифицирани специалисти, предимно инженери, като през последните години активно сме се включвали в проекти за изграждане на нови ядрени мощности в България. В Белене участвахме, в страни в Близкия изток, в Европа и в Африка. Спектърът ни на дейности като консултанти, като инженер на собственика е доста широк, започвайки от консултации при предпроектните поручвания, така наречените feasibility studies, с оценки на капиталните разходи, на експлоатационните, на перформанса на централите, създаване на базови основни модели, с които пресмятаме финансовите параметри на проектите. Като следващи важни дейности са проучване на площадки и анализ на площадки, подкрепа по време на управлението на проектите, инженеринг, техническа документация, ТОП, ОВОз и така нататък. Много други дейности. Не знам дали презентацията ми е на екрана, не, но...
Колегите, моля да пуснат презентация номер 2.
В презентацията имам повече слайдове за компанията, които няма повече да говоря за това. Сега в тази дискусия искам да се включа и да представя нашия опит от гледна точка на въпроса: може ли един ядрен проект да се осъществи в рамките на определеното време без закъснение и в рамките на определения бюджет? И какви биха могли да бъдат предпоставките за това?
Може да пуснете в Speak Review, с кликъра може да местиш слайдовете.
И тук предполагам, че по-нататък ще имам повече време да кажа с подробности, но очевидно, нали, става дума за едни големи финансови проекти. Окей. Тук са няколкото ни слайда за Уърли и нашето участие в различни проекти. Така. Основните предизвикателства, очевидно това са нюклеар. Проектите са големи, комплексни проекти с много участници, както изпълнители, така собственици, така публика, регулатори и така нататък. И могат да възникнат различни непредвидени проблеми. Повечето проекти, въпреки опита, който знаем и научаваме, все пак се оказват с превишени предварителни бюджети. Cost overruns, не мога да го преведа на български. И за това един от основните подходи, който виждаме като възможност за успешен проект, е сериозното и много внимателно предварително планиране. И тук по-нататък аз искам да се спра, но по-нататък в дискусията за предварителното планиране на капиталните разходи. Като цяло от една страна и също като разпределение във времето. И тук споменавам още няколко предварителни условия за успешен проект, на които по-нататък мисля, че колегите могат да се спрат. Аз лично не смятам, но това е доказан дизайн, опитни екипи и ясна програма за управление на риска. Благодаря.
Благодаря. Мистер Мърфи. Презентация 1.
Coming up. First of all, it's great to be in Bulgaria. I just want to thank the organizers for making it possible for me to be here. My first exposure to Bulgaria was back in 1994 when I saw the World Cup semifinals in New York with Hristo Stoichkov's Bulgaria against Roberto Baggio's Italy. So that was my really first exposure to Bulgaria many years ago. So it's great to be here. So just some initial observations. I think there are a lot of bad ideas on financing out there. And one of the responsibilities, I think, of financing experts is to dismiss all the bad ideas and deal in the realm of the possible. And when we talk about financing, it's impossible to talk about financing without talking about project structuring, economics, risks, project delivery. These are all the things that make a project viable. And if you don't have that viability, you're not going to get financing for your project. So it's building those fundamentals as you go forward in the project. And I think we're in an industry where there's a lot of unrealistic expectations, a lot of unrealistic projections. And when the financiers start diligencing the project, that's really when all of this stuff gets revealed. So understanding what's unique about nuclear is very important. And I think that some of the pressure points that we see are, how do you raise money prior to FID? There's a lot of money that is spent on a project before you make that final investment decision. Where's that money coming from? You have to assume, unfortunately, that a project is going to go over budget and over schedule. Where is that money coming from? So who's going to bear those risks if there are problems? We aspire to having the perfect project, but history tells us that that probably isn't going to happen. And so we have to, from a financing perspective, think about where the support for the project comes from. One technique that's been used in infrastructure all over the world is project finance. It's never been done in nuclear. It's not going to be done anytime soon. There are reasons for that due to the unique nature of nuclear. In the United States, we have the largest fleet in the world. We've built the most units in the world. No reactor that's ever been built in the United States was ever built in anything other than a regulated electricity market at the time the plant was built. There are lessons to be learned in all that. So how you structure the project, what are the economic conditions? These are all the things that you have to think about. The other thing that's unique to nuclear is when you look at the scale of the project, there are a lot of intangibles. When you do your financial model for the project, that's focusing on the internal economics of the project. But when you think about concepts like energy security, energy diversity, climate change, tax revenue, all these benefits that the project creates are not captured by the project. They're benefits to the state, the province, the country, whatever geographic condition you want to put on it. But there's so many things that value, units of value that the project creates. How do you value them? How do you monetize them? How do you capture these intangibles? You look at France and Italy, back in 1986 after Chernobyl, France kept its project going, its nuclear program going. Italy shut it down. At that point, Italy was paying the highest prices for electricity in Europe. It was importing electricity. It was importing fuel to run its plants. France benefited by continuing to run its plants. What was the economic impact to the country? It was huge. But when you're making the next project decision, none of that matters at a project level. So how can you balance project and the larger benefits? And this is where we get into the role of government, which is critical in project success. There's a lot of different ways that governments can be supportive. We can talk about that more in the Q&A, but governments can de-risk projects. They can be sources of financing. They can be obstructionists. And so we have to ask ourselves, where do we need that government support? And how can we sort of keep it discrete and tied to certain points in time? Because what we're trying to do in the context of financing is creating certainty in the project, certainty in project delivery, certainty in project economics. And when we think of nuclear in the context of critical infrastructure, we live in a world where the electricity just has to work. And those that have electricity, those that have green or clean electricity are going to surge ahead economically, and those that don't will fall behind. So you see the interconnection between public and private, between policy and project as we go forward. And when you look at what's being done in other parts of the world, we're seeing lots of tools being put in place, whether it's a CFD or tax benefits. There's lots of different tools that governments are implementing to make these projects viable because of the scale of nuclear projects, but of course, the importance of nuclear projects. So just to wrap up, I think there are several themes that we see that all support this idea of putting together a sound project. It's whether it's reducing risk or creating certainty, the interplay between public and private. These are all the things that really matter before you get to financing, but it's important to be thinking about financing from the very beginning. And so just to wrap up, there's a lot of things that come into a viable project, but really that test is whether or not you can finance it, and the role of government, the impact of policy to going together with what's being done at the project level. I think that's a way to capture the benefits so that we have a viable project. And if we have a viable project, we can put in place financing, and the timing and the different types of financing really start to matter as we build our financing model. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Vincent?
Good morning. My name is Vincent Zabielski. I'm a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman in London. I'd like to say Paul just gave the presentation I was going to give. He and I seem to be completely aligned on the salient points of today's conversation. First, a little bit about myself. I was a system engineering manager at a nuclear power plant in the US. I was an engineer actually for 15 years at a nuclear power plant at a BWR and then at a PWR. And I've now been a lawyer for 17 years, I suppose. And I was nuclear counsel for the UAE. Starting on the day I started was the day Fukushima melted down. So I got off the plane in Abu Dhabi, turned on the news, and it's like, great, what's next? During my time in the Emirates, I was responsible for the legal interpretation of the prime contract there and the interface with Team Korea's legal team. And it was a great experience. Pillsbury actually is we're a large international law firm. We were founded in 1868 in California, and we have the first nuclear practice in the world that was formed right after the dawn of the atomic age. Today, I want to talk about some themes. Building on what Paul said, the role of government is incredibly important, and in particular, the government support of financing. If we use the UK as an example, NuGen was going to build a fleet of AP1000s. That went under largely because there wasn't government support, and combined with issues that Westinghouse was having in the US. Then GE or Hitachi was going to build plants via the Horizon project. There was going to be a series of advanced boiling water reactors, and that fell down due to lack of government support after Hitachi had poured billions actually of money into the project. That was going to be in at the Anglesey site. So that one didn't work. And then Hinkley Point C was financed with CFD, which turned out to be less than ideal. Now, EDF is a massive company, and it could take on the kind of risk you see with a CFD type of of a financing arrangement, but under the CFD, the developer still takes all the risk. You know, you agree on a target price for the contract for difference, but you still have to deliver that project according to that budget. And that's also results, the CFD also results in about, I want to say about a third of the cost being interest during construction. So that doesn't work. What we're moving to in the UK for Sizewell C is the regulated asset base or RAB model. And this actually is probably the best way to go ahead and finance a nuclear power plant. And it is roughly analogous to the way that the US financed their fleet through passing the costs on to the eventual customers. So my first major theme today will be the role of government and how government can support a financeable project. The second thing is I cannot emphasize how important it is to have the business structure organized in a way that isolates the lenders and the investors from risk. This was done at Baraka. It's very commonly done in the States, but it's very rare in Europe where you will have a bifurcated structure where the borrower is not the operator. So in the UAE, in the ENEC example, the owner of the plant and the borrower is an entity called Baraka One, but Baraka One doesn't operate the plant. It's operated by NAWA, which means core in Arabic, if anyone was wondering. And what that does is under the major liability conventions such as Paris, Vienna, and the CSC, the liability is channeled to the operator, and the operator is insured for that liability. And I'm talking third-party nuclear liability. Under this bifurcated structure where the lender, the borrower is not the operator, you put up a shield between the banks and the nuclear liability. And it's, in my view, one of the most fundamental things that needs to happen to get financing. Or it's one of the most important aspects because the lenders don't want to take on that liability. So you have to do that from the start. And if your legislation doesn't support separate owners and separate operators, you should change that. Next, I wanted to talk about the structure of the EPC contract itself. For years and years, it was thought that best practice was to push as much risk onto the contractor. And we saw that. We saw that in Finland. We saw that in the US. And we see NSSS suppliers going bankrupt as a result. The key thing, I think, in the EPC contract is that the risk allocation has to put the risk on the party that can control that risk. And if you try to get the contractor to do stuff they have no control over and they have to absorb all the costs, one, they're going to raise the price. And two, if they can't control the risk, you have these uncontrolled risks out there. So that's an absolute key point in the EPC contract is the balancing of risk. And I think what we're going to see in the industry is a move towards alliance contracting, where instead of having adversarial relationships where one party wins and one party loses, you're going to see contracts where both parties are incentivized towards the end goal, which is having a nuclear power plant. If you have liquidated that damages at the end of the project and no power plant, that's a loss for everybody. But I'm probably over my time. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to participating in the panel.
Thank you, Vince. We are moving online now.
Okay.
George, I believe we're back to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Very nice to be with you. I wish I was there in person. Actually, I come from next door from Greece. It would have been a great combination to come and visit both, but hopefully next time. I have a few slides, and I'm going to try to go through them very quickly just to take in consideration the time that we have. Can you give me a second, please? Okay.
And George, can I ask you to try to adjust the microphone on your headset?
Yeah. Yes. Tell me, is this better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, great. Give me a second here. Sorry. But one theme that I think is very important is what Peter, you were saying before, and this is about lessons learned. You mentioned about lessons learned from Belene, but I must add also that every single nuclear power project around the world is a lesson learned for the industry and for you and everybody in Bulgaria. And this is where we need to focus, because there is incredible knowledge about what goes on, what has happened in the past. We have successful projects, we have had unsuccessful projects, and you can learn from each one of those. I've been working on nuclear new build for the past 20 years. And I've been involved in successful projects and unsuccessful projects, and I can see a pattern. It's very clear which ones are going to proceed forward and which ones are going to struggle. So I think that the key thing to focus on is financing. The reason for that is, at least too often, we start focusing on the technology selection, on things of that nature. But as you mentioned, Peter, the projects do not fail usually because of the technology. They do fail because of project structuring, and that's consistent throughout the years that we have seen. Now, I have this slide here, shows nuclear finance in 2024. I've been putting up the same slide for the past, I think, 7 years. Nothing has really changed. It means that there's no standard Preston model. There's different solutions trying to be found somewhere. And everybody's still struggling with this issue globally. There is no significant multilateral support, and I'm that now there's a little bit more momentum about that issue, where there's a lot of discussions with the multilateral organizations like the World Bank Group, EIB, the EBRD, to get more involved in new nuclear, and I think that could be very, very constructive. Nuclear is a typical class of projects and assets that would benefit from multilateral support. Milko is going to talk to us a little about IBNI and that concept and how that could fit in as well. So the couple things that we should focus on when we learn about earlier projects is the issue of risk and how do you minimize that risk. As Paul mentioned, that that's one of the key things for financing is minimizing the risk. And you look at the issue of course, about safety, having a complete detailed design. You start getting into a project, which typically doesn't happen. You'd be surprised. You start a project and people start saying, "Oh, we have to do the detailed design now." Shocking every single time that I hear that. But also, when you're looking at this from a vendor management and an owner management, you want to have key personnel involved in the project that have done this before. Many times we've seen projects where they bring in people in order to start a new build project and they have people from operations of a nuclear power plant. That's not the answer. You need people that have actually constructed nuclear power plants and hopefully the same one that they're constructing in your territory. You also want an management, which is have experience in managing construction projects at least, but hopefully some nuclear projects. And then there is the issue about project management. How do you integrate the owner management and the vendor management? And one of the most successful project managers that I've seen, I've worked with in the past, worked with them in many projects around the world. He talks about leadership by the owner, with hands-off leadership by the owner, with the vendor. What does that mean? Is that the drives the project. It is the project. The vendor is there to help and to support and do everything. And you want to lead them, but at the same time, you don't want to get involved into the details of how they do things. So there is a fine balance, and maintaining that balance is going to help you create this partnership and teamwork that's going to make the successful project. Of course, looking at host governments and expert government supporting structures, regulatory processes, and human resource development is also a very important issue. And this is a long lead item. You cannot start early enough to build up your capability in order to build and operate your nuclear power plant. Paul mentioned this very clearly. and this is the biggest problem, of course, is that government funding and support is essential because you have the benefits that are mostly sovereign in nature, energy security, diversification, climate change. You do not capture these things in the project economics, although they're tremendously valuable for a country, for a company, for a country, for a region. So only governments can properly value these benefits, and experience shows that project without significant government support, whatever support structure, this type of support you will find, will never go ahead. Now, as we're talking about financing, I wanted to just go through this very quickly, but this is a real life exercise. Going through this with a commercial bank that was looking to finance nuclear. And I remember we went there and we started talking about this and that, having all of our kind of pre-project discussions. And the bankers who know very little about nuclear at the time, they started going back to like, listen, can we just go back to real basics here? I need to understand this in a way that makes sense to me. And they started saying, okay, does this country need a power plant? Can you just tell me that? How does that work? Do they need the power? So we went through that. Then, do they want a nuclear power plant? Of course, they want it. The question is, does the public want it? Is there a public acceptance? Can the country afford it? This is sometimes overlooked in many smaller countries as well, that the affordability of a nuclear power plant is very difficult. How will you pay for it? That's when you start getting into the structures, the CFDs, and all that kind of stuff. How would you manage and support it? Then after you answer these questions, then you will ask, how will you build it? How will you operate it? How will you maintain it in the long term? How will you decommission it? Now, this is how we started. This is the discussion. This ended up being a spreadsheet of, I cannot remember how many lines it was, but it was hundreds of lines going through every single risk of the nuclear power project. As you started drilling down these essential questions, you started thinking, it's like, okay, how do I address this issue? And then you start thinking about the risk profile of the nuclear project. So thinking in fundamentals is always a good idea because it puts the project in a framework that is understandable to everybody involved. So one thing that you want to establish, of course, is clear objectives, a long-term relationship and partnership, a reasonable and achievable project schedule and budget. Too often we hear about pronouncements, which unfortunately sometimes happen. They say we're going to have power plants finished by 2028 or 2030, and everybody knows that this is unrealistic, and that is not a good way to start a project. And the other thing that you have to think about is what is your objective. Usually, when you have a nuclear power plant, you're looking for power, energy. Sometimes, though, we have the issue about policies where it's come in about localization, which is a wonderful thing, and you do want to create localization. But if that's the objective of the project, that changes the fundamentals, the fundamental risk analysis. So you have to think about that as well. And this is just a very quick kind of examples. Sometimes that we as people in the industry speak in the terms of the industry. We speak in terms of engineering. And this is not the language that the banks hear. They know the language of money. They will understand the language of risk. So when we go to a bank and we talked about our latest technology, all the bank hears is first of a kind risk. It's not a good thing, when you hear the latest technology. You want proven technology, you want things that have been done before. Issues about consortium, you're talking about internal disputes and problems like that. So this is just an example of things that we have to start thinking about as you approach the financial industry to speak in their language, not in the language of the nuclear industry or the language of engineering. But the good thing is that we are at a turning point. A few years ago, we hardly had any Gen 3+ reactors online. Now we have them. We have EPRs in operation. We have an AP1000 in operation. We have VVRs in operation. So we're getting closer to commercialization of SMRs. So there's a lot there, as we said before, there's a lot of information and knowledge on how these projects were successful and how they were not successful. Everything that happens around the world is going to be relevant to your project. What happened in Vogel in the United States is relevant. What happened in Kiloto is relevant to see what went wrong and how can we improve on that. And also what went right in places like UAE and how ENIC got a lot of these issues right and how do we move forward is also relevant. So learn from the mistakes, learn from the successes, and make sure you don't repeat the mistakes and you repeat the successful kind of formulas. So it's developing a nuclear power plant is a very complex task. There's a lot of issues to worry about, but financing is a primary challenge. You have to engage in this discussion really early on, and you have to make use of all the available information and knowledge that's out there. And one thing that is also very important, it's the thing that I have here in red in the last bullet, is leadership. All the successful projects that I've seen have a leader, somebody who actually is driving the project, who's capable of making things happen, but also interacting with various parts of the government and grab people's attention. Having the right leader, it makes all the difference in my view. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Valentin?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Maybe a bit louder would be better.
I will adjust it. Добър ден. So I will also do a very short presentation to introduce the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Please let me. You see?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Valentin Schreider, and I work at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development Nuclear Safety Department. And I'm responsible for the management of the Kozloduy International Decommission Support Fund, which helps Bulgaria to decommission the very first four nuclear power plant units of Kozloduy nuclear power plant. And I'm doing this for 12 years already, I believe. Before, I used to work at Ignalina nuclear power plant, both in its operation and decommissioning. Altogether, I'm in nuclear for what it will be 32 years. So next. Yep. So speaking about the bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development was established in 1991 to build a new post-Cold War era in Central and Eastern Europe. The EBRD is owned by 71 countries, as well by the European Union and the European Investment Bank. Each shareholder is represented in the Board of Governors, which is over the structure you may see on the slide, together with the key milestone of its development. We are active in almost 40 countries across 3 continents, from the South and Eastern Mediterranean to Central and Eastern Europe and to Central Asia. Invested over 170 billion in 640 private and public sector projects. In investment foster growth and innovation in our countries and transition to market economies in our region. EBRD is the only international financial institution with a mandate and a more than 30-year track record of successful development and implementation of nuclear safety and security programs in Eastern and Central Europe and Central Asia, for which nuclear legacy actually consists a large burden and obstacle for development. In our we call them country of operation, means where the bank implements its projects. And 8 of these countries operate nuclear power plants, 25.2 gigawatt of installed capacity, which is 6.4% of the world installed capacity. And we having 11 nuclear power newcomers amongst our countries of operation, including Turkey, Poland, Egypt, Jordan, and Uzbekistan. Our experience proves the value of international financial institution as nuclear decommissioning fund manager. Success in developing complex project in a very complex environment, guarantee of transparency, accountability, anti-corruption, and fairness, skills and experience available, and experience in our region. EBRD is the fund manager, and most of our funds are donor funds, operates under clear fund governance with the donors' assemblies. And the framework agreements between the bank and the recipient countries have the status of international treaties, which exempt grant funds from payment of taxes and custom duties and provide the required nuclear indemnity to contractors. EBRD procurement policies and rules ensures fair and transparent worldwide competition. EBRD's environmental and social policy ensures environmentally sound and sustainable development. EBRD's public information policy embodies the bank's commitment to enhance the transparency of its activities and promote good governance. Continued multilateral cooperation and assistance where appropriate is crucial in the decommissioning of nuclear facilities and handling the legacy issues of nuclear industry left post-Soviet era. Now, the important is the bank's energy sector strategy, which has been recently adopted, actually in December 23. And the important for today's panel and for nuclear energy in general is this provision that the bank will continue to consider funding for safety improvements to operating plants, as well as for the radioactive waste management and the decommissioning of nuclear facilities. Recognizing the role nuclear energy will play in the energy transition, we will continue to monitor developments in the nuclear sector and the needs of our countries of operation. Should any opportunities in line with the EBRD's private sector mandate emerge, we will revisit our current approach. And what does it mean in practical terms and in frame of our today's panel? Unfortunately, as you may see, our bank and as far as many other international financial institutions, I believe they still are very cautious and careful in terms of engagement in such a massive projects as a nuclear new build, as our previous speakers also explained, and I fully agree with them that nuclear new build is a long lasting massive investment project with many risks, which still the banks, as the previous speaker very rightly summarized in his slide, that with the different perspective on these risks. Although all these risks are now, I believe, well understood, we all together still need to work on how to address them and how to convince the multiple shareholders that these risks are well thought and duly mitigated. And if I may allow myself to give a couple of comments on the international financial institution approach in general so far, is that though, including the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which was created to address these issues of coming from the Soviet era and collapse of Soviet Union and this socialist ideology and economy, and we were created to address the issues which others may have no interest or guts to engage. So we still, as a multilateral institution with very diverse shareholders, we also see the very diverse and quite often opposite opinion on nuclear and its place in the overall energy future, addressing the climate change and all of these important matters. Therefore, I believe we need to continue to work with our shareholders, governments, to promote the nuclear as a solution for the climate change transition and low carbon energy future on of our planet. And back to our role so far, as I said, we will continue to monitor the developments in nuclear sector, and from the practical perspective, I believe the bank may be willing to engage in a step-by-step approach, and as the nuclear energy and the new build encompasses the broad variety of different expertise and knowledge and industries, from environmental monitoring and protection and up to various auxiliary matters.
I'm sorry. I'd like to make sure we have enough time for the intro. The rest and we can continue in the discussions.
Thank you very much. And I look forward for an open discussion at the panel.
Yeah.
And here you may see our contact details. Thank you.
Thank you. Milos?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for having me on the panel today. My name is Milos Stefanovic. I'm the Managing Director in the Natural Resource Team here in London for Citi, providing regional coverage across different industries, including power and utilities. I'm sorry I couldn't be in Varna today, just like some of my fellow speakers online, but it's great to be on it, because rarely do I attend the panel, ranked number 7, I think, and my slides have been covered by now. So not much I can present, and I want to present, but I do want to share with you maybe some of the thinking behind when it comes to big banks. And maybe that will be something that without the slides will be of interest to your audience. So one of the first comments made is that, you know, we are beginning the conversation on nuclear financing. I think this is a very important one. because I'm here to learn as well, to hear from the other speakers. Because if you ask me for the bank's brag sheet on, all the renewable financings we have done in recent years, some of the new hydrogen financing, carbon capture financing, and so on and so forth, it's going to be a long list of tombstones. When it comes to nuclear financing, nothing, right? It's a blank sheet. The sheet stopped sometime in the 90s. I wasn't here in the office at the time, I was in school. But the point is that since the 90s, very little has really truly been done in the nuclear space as far as the certainly city is concerned. So we're here to learn. I think the broader point here, somebody already mentioned, but I just really want to drill that through. In my mind, when it comes to nuclear, we need to consider three aspects of it. One is people, one is technology, and one is money. And I would really put them in that order. I was in Serbia 2 weeks ago, next door, my native country. They're very keen on building nuclear. They have zero nuclear experience. My first question to the government: where are the people? Who is going to develop it and run it, right? Let alone kind of create value out of it. Next week I'm in Sopot. That's the Polish version of Davos. The Polish government very keen on nuclear. Question mark is, where are the people, right? Who is going to do the same thing as we were discussing in Serbia? The other 2 points, technology and money. I think technology is clear, it's there, right? We're talking about generation 2, generation 3. We in the banks are getting very, very excited about generation 4, the building blocks of SMRs, something that reminds us of perhaps the early days of renewables, because in those days for large scale wind parks and solar, we also were looking for some sort of regulatory and government support. Nowadays, it goes as hot chips around, right? It's something that is highly standardized. So there is a very strong belief when SMR technology comes along, this is something that the banks will clearly be very, very keen to support. The other aspect of this whole exercise around nuclear is that, the banks have been very busy during the COVID, followed by the gas and power crisis in Europe, followed by the war in Ukraine, right? Providing huge liquidity cushions for our clients and innovative solutions in the form of various types of hedging to make sure that the industry survives really challenging times. So during those 2, 3, 4 years, nuclear was always somewhere there, but not really there yet. But then with energy security, I think nuclear has come back. And now, of course, as part of the broad-based energy transition, I think there is a recognition that nuclear is a part of a solution, and it has to be, right? And I think the question marks from all of you will probably be, what's in it for the big banks, right? Be involved in a project that takes a long time. Somebody has already mentioned this. Delays, overspend, over budget. And I tell you very honestly, I lead various deal teams. And when I look at the deal teams for standardized renewables or even new case hydrogen or carbon capture projects, there is a certain number of people on it. When I look at the 2 or 3 nuclear project situations we are currently covering, the email list is huge. So it takes a lot of resource from the bank as well to make sure that these nuclear projects come to be successful. But 3 reasons why I think it's important that the big banks get involved. One is we at big banks also have our net zero targets. So therefore, nuclear as part of the transition helps us meet those targets, whether it's 2030, whether it's a lot longer, 2050. Then portfolio emissions. So when we look how we report our portfolio emissions, nuclear again represents an angle for us to benefit from. And finally, I think building expertise, clearly something that is missing. And I look at my junior bankers and I think they've never seen a nuclear power plant. I took them to the offshore drill, offshore wind park. They're well acquainted with CCGTs, but they have never seen nuclear. So this is something that from the bank's perspective is critical going forward, to learn and support and be as innovative as we can be in terms of financing, because the financing solutions have already been mentioned. I'm not going to go through them. That was in one of my slides. But I think we need to be innovative, and I completely agree with all the speakers before me that that we stand ground to support the industry, support the countries, and support the development and transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Milos. You are welcome to bring some of your fellow junior bankers in September, I believe. There are going to be the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of the operating Kozloduy nuclear power plant. Suchi?
Thank you.
I don't think I could have said it better than Milos. Honestly, I was enraptured. But my name is Suchi. I'm a vice president in the infrastructure team, like you mentioned, in London. As you can see, I have an American accent, and I sound hoarser than I am because I'm unfortunately sick. So it's probably better that I'm not there in person today. And if you hear me coughing, I'm sorry. That's just unfortunately the London weather. I think that for us, that while we, explicitly don't have a house position, I think that we ultimately kind of serve our clients. Our credentials kind of need no further mention. However, we kind of recognize clients such as yours and others kind of globally, including in Eastern Europe, recognize kind of the need for nuclear as part of the energy transition, decarbonization, and security targets. And then we're kind of here to service that. And now when we talk about kind of what that is, I think that's kind of part of the point of the discussion here, is how best we can kind of take some of the key kind of thought points and thought pieces and actually make it tangible. In terms of kind of a few things that I wanted to kind of speak about, which I thought it was very interesting earlier on. There was a presentation where it kind of showed the language for the bankers versus the language for the nuclear industry. I think that bridging the gap is very critical, and that's where kind of a bank is helpful, because you're able to kind of facilitate some of the technical jargon and make it easier to understand from a financial advisor perspective to kind of other banks. I think the key kind of mechanism that people want to understand is the balancing between moving towards kind of a more kind of, I would say, not automated, but more standardized model between kind of the various kind of countries, et cetera, how much can be similar versus I think in terms of SMRs, et cetera, in terms of kind of new builds, there is going to be kind of key site-specific and kind of government-specific nuances that need to be taken into consideration. And so while there's kind of benefit in terms of standardization for bankability and kind of proving kind of, you can kind of replicate it to, I think people call it industry size, nth of a kind. I think that there's also going to be kind of consideration in terms of how the government support manifests, whether it's just, kind of a broad bank guarantee, or in reality, like many of the kind of panelists before me kind of already mentioned, can it be made bespoke based on the priorities of the government? And is that support financial in nature, or more kind of bespoke, as kind of Milos said, in terms of what the people want and how are they driving the process forward, and more kind of less monetary respective, but more an execution perspective. So I'll let David continue. I know he wants to do a round panel and ask us a lot of hot topics, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchi. Milko, you have the honor of going last, and I would kindly ask you to also keep it brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please upload my presentation, or if you are not ready, I will do that. Because
if you could
I
please
believe...
screen share. The idea was for online participants too.
Is it visible now?
We are getting there. I believe we are seeing your screen, but no slide yet.
Okay, but not the slides. Yes, I see that my slides are not yet there. I have issues to share the slides.
I'll
If you
try
can
to put
share,
them up on
I
our
will
end.
begin speaking. I'm happy that I'm last at this panel because, as some of the previous speakers said, I believe all has been said already. However, here I'm to represent one initiative which we believe as people, 15 professionals all around the world, is an initiative which will cover several of those gaps which have been identified through the speakers. This initiative is called International Bank for Nuclear Infrastructure. So that's an initiative started 2 years ago. I'm part of the advisory group of that initiative, as several of the other panelists around. So the initiative is intended to create a new nuclear-focused international financing institutions. As we have heard, there are no international financing institutions which are ready to go nuclear today. I had the honor to work earlier at EBRD, and I saw the evolution there, but still EBRD continues to be very, very distant from new builds. The similar situation is with the European Investment Bank and other regional banks, as Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, World Bank as well. Even this move and drive is coming all around the world. We have seen leaders from countries to call the international financing institutions to change their policies. We are very supportive to that move. However, it will take time from one side, but from the other side, it will not be enough. So the initiative is complementary to the existing infrastructure of international financing institutions. And I was very happy to hear what Citi and JP Morgan representatives mentioned here at the panel. Indeed, the creation of such bank is intended also to create a pool of knowledge and expertise and support the efforts of the commercial banks to crowd in capital from the private sector, to ensure enabling environment and appropriate infrastructure for projects complex as nuclear. When the agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the bank is talking about standards and criteria, this is to support the harmonization and standardization of the enabling environment for repetitive nuclear projects. And we fully understand that in any country, a solution can be ensured, as it was the case for years already, through the export credit agencies, through some other means of support on a bilateral basis. However, significant gaps continues to exist beyond these bilateral arrangements. And we have heard this morning that US Exim is very keen to invest in Kozloduy 7 and 8, that K-Sure and K-Exim are ready to provide as well the part of the financing to the Korean scope. And again, it is a question of harmonizing and ensuring a common understanding. In addition, the bank is intended to scale nuclear, because on a bilateral basis, we see in Europe now new build projects in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria, coming in Czech Republic and in other places. However, this is not enough to honor the commitment to triple nuclear. And there are a number of new markets where the nuclear infrastructure is not as well developed as in countries which operates nuclear. And these markets are important, in particular when we talk about small modular reactors and the need for scaling and repeating the same projects in the same way in different environments. Because very frequently when people talk about nuclear, they say, oh, each project is a first of a kind. Why? Even, for example, the AP1000 today operates 6 units, 4 in China, 2 in US. The environment is new, the regulator is new, the regulatory framework is new, the legal framework, well, it's not new because there is a global nuclear regime which applies, but still country to country might differ. So such bank as the role of other international financing institution has is the policy dialogue, alignment of the requirements, the filling the gaps in legal, regulatory, institutional, and governance infrastructure, which is very important for the success of any project, even more for the success of large investment project. And this morning I have heard that some of the panelists mentioned the dark environment of Bulgarian industrial reality, which I believe is a very alarming message. Is it so dark? Or so what I want to say is it is very important what in which environment the project is taking place, what is the governance, the transparency, the way that that the project is set up, and the overall investment attractiveness of the country. So here is the role of the government. Here is the role of such financing institutions to conduct the dialogue and to support the project proponents, the designers, the technology providers, and the EPC contractors for the success of those projects. I'm sorry that I had no chance to share my slide, but I hope that the organizers will share them with the interested party, and I'm here to continue participating in that panel. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Milko. Yes, certainly we will be uploading all the slides on the conference archive page. Regarding the industry, they're all in the room and the lights off. That's why it's dark. But as soon as we flick the switch on, it will be lightness for the Bulgarian nuclear industry and broader industry. And with that, I turn it over to David to summarize those remarks and open the floor for our discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon to the attendees, and good morning to those who are online. I think somebody once said, everything has been said, but not by everybody, right? So, but I won't repeat what has been said. I'd like to make 2 specific points. The first is, in my personal experience, this is one of the most high octane panels I have ever seen on nuclear new build. And it's coming at really the right time, because this is a critical moment, not just for the nuclear industry, but for Bulgaria and for the European energy markets. And so thank you for Peter and for BulAtom for organizing this. So this is a unique moment. I hope that for the audience, we're going to try to tone things down a little bit, because most of us are project structurers, are financiers, are legal experts, nuclear experts, but we are not nuclear industry, or at least not anymore. We are not government. And I'd like to share a few themes. And what we're going to do is I'll start asking a few questions of the panelists, and I would ask the audience to think of any questions that you would like to contribute during the next. We're halfway through the panel at this point. So you should feel free at any point in time to raise your hand or to ask for the microphone. And we would very much welcome a fireside chat element to the rest of this panel. If it's possible to put up the one slide that I wanted to show.
Speaker view.
Oops. Okay. I'm going to try to recap with just a few very basic points. We have heard across our 9 panelists and over the past 2.5 days that there is a very significant opportunity and requirement, not just for the European power and electricity markets, but for Bulgaria in particular, to address how do we bring nuclear capacity forward? How do we bring baseload, low carbon, clean energy forward? We heard from the president himself yesterday or 2 days ago. Yes, but it must be affordable. It must be competitive. We have heard requirements. We have heard that there will be support, but that it must be measured. It is not unlimited from the politicians, from the government. We have heard about taxonomy. We've heard about the importance of energy security. We've heard just now that there is capital available. We had some very, very helpful remarks. Thank you to the gentleman from Citi and Suchi at JP Morgan Chase as well as Valentine with respect to the EBRD. There is capital available. These are banks who have said they are here to help their customers. These things are the opportunities. What are the challenges? What can be considered an opportunity is also a challenge. Is the nuclear industry prepared to triple capacity? Heightened political support is very helpful, but not necessarily. And one of the points I'd like to raise with the panel is when we talk about government support, when you are government, what are you hearing? What support exactly? It is not a black box government. Government has many, many stakeholders. Government needs to get reelected. Government has civil servants. Government has political appointees. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of each of these elements. I'll skip the mega themes. And as we go forward for the next hour or so, I'd like to just present a few proposed rules of the road for the panel. Moderators will issue, Peter and myself will issue a traffic violation warning, a yellow card, if you like, if we hear the following words spoken together: fixed price, risk allocation, mature design, government support, FOAK, NOAK, FOC and NOAK, bank and ability, invest and ability. This is not to say that these words cannot and should not be spoken. It's that when we say them, I'm an ex-financier, a contractor might use these words, government might use these words, council may use these words. We do not use them in the same way. And it's very important, and I think Suchi and George made some very helpful comments about the vocabulary gap and the importance of making sure that all of the different stakeholders understand what's going on in the room. The second rule of the road is that we'd like everybody to speak freely, that we'd like the panelists in particular to share their very deep experience, and hopefully we can enjoy the rest of the panel. Those are my slides. And what I'd like to do is to maybe kick off, Peter, with a first question. And it seems beholden, incumbent to the owner, the sponsor, the developer today who is amongst us, Mr. Ivanov, to have the first question, because Mr. Ivanov represents the promise of Kozloduy 7 and 8, the promise of everything we have been talking about for the past 2.5 days. And my question, Mr. Ivanov, to you would be, as an owner, you fundamentally for the next 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, you have a series of make or buy decisions. Certain things the owner will do, the other things the owner will procure. You will ask your stakeholders to provide you the support that the owner himself cannot do. Can you share with us your top 1 or 3 or 5 requests or requirements that you would like to ask your key stakeholders? Who are your key stakeholders, and what would you like them to do for you to help this project be successful?
David, thanks a lot for the question. I do need to think a little bit, how could I limit to only 3 or 5? But I'll start from somewhere. Definitely with SPV, and as a company that should develop the unit 7 and 8 construction, we need to enter into EPC contract with our partners from Hyundai and Westinghouse. So definitely the first would go to them as a requirement already even set and adopted by the parliament and the government, with the expectation to have fixed terms on schedule and also on budget. We do expect that Westinghouse, with their experience, already completed 6 units. They have enough lessons learned, and they could lead Hyundai, even being their first AP1000 project within this long journey. On the other hand, as Oscar mentioned in the morning, they have the experience of how to make construction company understand the technology and how could this work together. But something else which is very important, maybe second one, is government support. Within Europe, I don't imagine a project, nuclear project for new build, and especially large scale new build, to be completed or to be successful without the participation of the government. And why is that? All the panelists have mentioned that there are certain challenges related to the financing of such a complicated and very complex project. As a matter of fact, nuclear project is the most complex project that could happen and is happening on Earth. Maybe I'm not aware of some other projects, but definitely for nuclear, it is really a masterpiece how you could negotiate all terms with EPC contractors, how to run the risk, how to manage everything, and how to secure the financing on the other hand. So definitely what we would look from the government would be issuing state guarantees that would comfort the banks. Definitely we have started our negotiations with US Exim, but on the other hand, and US Exim together with KEXIM, they need to follow OECD guidelines. And following these guidelines, they need to have in front of them state guarantees in order to support such a project. The good thing is that having them on board, on the other hand, would give relief to the commercial banks. What I heard from Citi that, in fact, they don't have the necessary experience, but definitely these banks have a lot of experience in financing nuclear projects. So they have their expertise. They'll do the necessary due diligence in order to accommodate any concerns for the other banks that could have on the technical part of the project. And what else is important for the need of the government in our project? The government also provides the dividend policy within the energy sector. So if the government is willing to secure the necessary equity for this project, definitely we need some very predictable dividend policies that could secure on an annual basis the equity injection needed for the project, so that we could reach at least 20 to 30% of equity participation. So the rest, 70 to 80, would be debt. And I think that this is enough.
There's
It doesn't.
a lot to unpack there. Thank you. Just maybe for clarity, among some of our panelists and some of our foreign guests, Kozloduy New Builds is 100% state-owned through a series of other entities, and this will remain the case, correct? Bulgaria is not going to seek a partner in the shareholding.
Well, Peter, since Bulgaria is carrying the whole risk, I'm not aware why should we seek of any partner right now. Of course, for the power generation, the power itself, we would look into several directions, several options, PPS, etc. But it is a bit earlier for that.
Yes, I absolutely concur with the opinion that it should be 100% state-owned, and I think this should be very reassuring to some of the potential financiers. And also, I heard from Paul at the beginning, big question is where you get the money to get you to final investment decision. Here, it's also probably worth pointing out that the company has so far been capitalized with north of 750 million euros, and through a decision by the National Assembly, another perhaps 800 from the expected sale of the 2 nuclear steam supply systems that were delivered for BelAtom to the Ukraine. So another 800 million are earmarked explicitly solely for that purpose. So we may expect that in the course of the next year, the capital of New Builds will amount to close to 1.5 billion euros, correct?
Well, this is correct. And what is good to be underlined here, that the government in the last year and a half and the state itself, the parliament, they have turned into nuclear, and they have been supportive and very keen on that, with adopting several decisions taken either from the parliament or from the Council of Ministers. But each of these decisions is backing the project and also giving some highlight guidelines, what to be pursued in the negotiations, what terms to be negotiated, and etc. But coming back to financing, I don't think that only what is already forecasted for the financing is enough. Definitely, we need predictability in terms of dividend policy. And that's why the state, as the owner of the project, needs to be very clear on how we're going on with the equity injections, because definitely what we have up to now and what we expect to receive from the BelAtom equipment wouldn't be enough to secure the equity that we need.
Thank you very much. A question I'd like to ask the panel, nobody in particular, so whoever presses their raise the hand button first, or whichever of the in-person panelists wants to answer is most welcome. How much, and I won't use the term government support, but how much government support is enough? We have seen across the EU, there are some countries that believe, Mr. Ivanov, as you have said, the government must own all of the equity. This is the most deliverable, the most credible type of owner, perhaps, undoubtedly. But at the same time, there are countries that are asking and for this and for revenue support. And there are other countries that are saying, yes, A, equity support, yes, B, revenue support, and yes, C, debt guarantees. Is it necessary for a new build government to have to provide guarantees in triplicate, 3 ways?
Just the people online, you could just unmute and start talking, because it would be easier than raising hands, and the same for people on the panel, please.
I would be happy to start the discussion on that. Definitely the support is needed, but there is another question we need to answer, talking about nuclear. So We experienced a huge energy crisis in the past 2 years, not past 2 years, but 2021 and 22. And does anyone in the hall and also the panelists know what was the cost of that? Can you imagine how much Europe paid for the energy crisis? There are estimations, evaluations, I think, from Bloomberg, and the figure is approximately 1 trillion euros. And when talking about support, we need also to coordinate this with the word security. When it comes to security, everybody turns to the government. Then if you want security, why not the government to support such projects? Everybody expects security from the government, and I think into this equation, we receive the answers. So if we want security, if we want predictability, definitely we need involvement of the government. That's my short answer of that.
I think I'll jump in on this one. I completely agree with you that energy security is really, when you get down to it, a matter of national defense. And it's a natural function of the government to ensure energy security. In the UK in 2022, we paid over £10,000 for per megawatt at peak price, which is at the time was I guess about 13,000, 14,000 US dollars. And that was to keep the grid from collapsing and to keep the system operator from using rolling blackouts. Now, if you look at the planning that the government in the UK has done, we have 5 operating nuclear plants, 4 of which will shut down in the next couple of years. And Hinkley Point C won't be online until probably 2030. So we're looking at energy starvation periods over between 2026 and 2030. So the government there has failed. The government here has an opportunity to step in and provide all the support that is necessary to make sure that this project is a success, because the alternative is expensive, and it's potentially can result in civil unrest in the worst case.
Yeah, I think getting back to your question, David, the answer is all of the above, but an appreciation of they're all different things. So when you look at the export credit agencies saying, I need a sovereign guarantee, that's not real money. It's a contingent obligation. And when you know how export credit agencies work, they will restructure a deal to the end of time if there's a chance of staving it before they ever call on a sovereign guarantee. So it's symbolic, but it's not symbolic, because it really then starts to depend on how a government scores those obligations in terms of its budget rules. So that's one type of thing. Then you get into PPAs, CFDs, whatever. That's to make sure there's revenue. I mean, and no investor is going to come into a nuclear plant with 5, 7, 10 years of development and say, I'm going to put out all this money, be exposed to regulatory risk, exposed to delivery risk, and then after that's all done, I don't know if I can sell the power and at what price. And we can just study the United States about what happens when you deregulate markets and then subsidize renewables and then give them dispatch preferences. And we also have cheap gas, and then say, golly gee, why is this nuclear plant not competitive? And I think if you think about a nuclear project like everything else, you're fundamentally wrong from the start, because it's baseload generation, it's critical infrastructure, it's the backbone of the grid. And if you start thinking of it in those ways, together with all those intangible benefits we talked about, now you understand why this isn't so big an ask of governments. And then I think the other key is, if you're asking for direct support in the form of equity or even debt, the message to government is, get me over this difficult period of 5 to 10 years of development and construction, And if we get the economics right, I can get your money out of the project. So you shouldn't be going to a government and saying, put your money in for all time and let it sit there for 60 to 100 years. But get me through construction and maybe 6 months to a year of operation. And then if I have a solid revenue stream, all that unlocking private capital discussion that gets completely overblown when we talk about construction will be there for operations, and you will be able to take out the government money. So you've got to think of a financing plan that is capturing different stages of project risk, different sources of capital, lowering the aggregate cost of capital by bringing in that lower risk money later on that has no interest in talking about a project 10 years out. When you go to private equity funds, when you go to pension funds and you say, hey, let's talk about a nuclear project, they'll say, well, when's it going in operation? You say till 2035, 2039. They're like, well, come and talk to me like 2 years before it's going to enter into commercial operation. So understanding the different types of money and the timing of money becomes really important, and understanding that there's just not a lot of money out there in the construction stage is very important. It was interesting on day one, there was somebody from the Bulgarian Industry Association. No disrespect, I don't remember the exact title, but talking about the need for industry to get clean and green power, but they don't want to operate, which is perfectly understandable. But then the next question is, are you willing to help in development by providing some capital? So those are where we can start talking about different types of money too.
Ivailo, do you want to respond to that? Because I see in the back. Microphone.
Peter? Peter, can I jump in after?
Well, we as industry are still learning what nuclear is in terms of not being the off-taker from the grid. Because right now, our connection with nuclear is just buying the power through the energy exchange or through a trader. And the decarbonization goals clearly pressure some of the sectors, especially the chemicals, where high temperatures are needed for steam production and for hydrogen, to look forward to nuclear. We don't feel we can operate. For some enterprises, let's say partially financing with own capital would be feasible, but risking a yellow card, I will say government support, but government support not in terms of financing, but in terms of regulations. And this is still new for the government as well. And I don't know if there is someone from the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, but I know that when they hear the word, the acronym SMR, they stand on their toes. Because you need to have the initial framework in order to, how to say, to construct the project, to see how much own equity should be invested, to see how much lending you will need, to see what will be needed to make the project bankable, because you will take a loan from the bank or from the financial markets, but you would need to repay it. And for now, the general view is that, at least from the conversations I've had with some of our members, are that they
will be able to finance the initial stages of pre-feasibility study, site selection, and so on and so forth. But when the project development itself starts, the preferred model for now is to create an SPV and then to transfer the ownership to maybe not fully, because the industry itself wants to focus on the manufacturing its own products, and it's not able, it doesn't have the capacity for regulatory compliance, for operations. And at the end of the day, they need to be, and they want to be only the off-taker of steam, of electricity, hydrogen, because that's the primary reason why they maybe will be developing nuclear energy. Because of the decarbonization pressures. If it wasn't for the decarbonization, they will still be continuing burning coal, petro coal anthracite, and what is there as economically feasible as possible. So the nuclear endeavor basically is a solution, possible solution to external pressures. But the finances are not clear for us, speaking as an industry. The applications also are not very clear for many of the industries. And many of the industries are cautious, even if nuclear is feasible for them, because of the liabilities that come with nuclear. And it's still very early stage, and there is no straightforward answer. And risking second yellow card. Yeah, but the forum is ending, so I will be gone in the 19th minute. So they see, someone mentioned, I think it was Mr. Kovachev, that every nuclear reactor is considered to be first of a kind because of the differences. Imagine what this is for the industry, that the majority of the industry has seen nuclear reactors only on presentations. And it imposes a huge challenge, and that leads to only one conclusion, that we need to cooperate closely and much more closer in order to be useful for each other.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered.
Well, you added one more dimension of regulatories, of government support that's needed, which is clarity in regulations, somehow vis-a-vis the industry. This was just a kind reminder to the audience that if you don't participate voluntarily, you will get called on. So please join us. And with that, I turn back to Milko, I think, wanted to add on the question of, can there be too much government support? And so far I get the sense that no, yeah, the more the better, right, David?
I'm not sure that this is what
You are
I will
muted,
say,
Milko.
Peter. Yeah, no, I'm not muted.
We cannot hear you.
I'm sorry.
Online, we can hear him.
Cannot hear you,
Okay.
Milko.
Yeah, online they can hear me.
Cannot hear you. Okay.
Мисля, че другите участници онлайн го чуват. Някакъв проблем с аудиото от онлайн?
Yes. Yeah.
Just a really quick point while he's sorting out. To the point about industry, when you think about high-end users and nuclear, we do have precedent, whether it's the Mankala structure in Finland or the Exceltium deal in France that EDF did. We are seeing high-end users of electricity where they're saying, I need to secure that supply. I don't need to chase the cheapest price, but I need long-term price stability and assurance of supply. And when you look at the energy crisis that's happened, coincident with the war in Ukraine, and you see how German industry is struggling and somehow it's shutting down facilities, looking to relocate. It shows the importance of just getting reliable electricity base load 24/7, but it also opens up an interesting point, which is for those that can build and supply lots of clean baseload electricity, it creates an industrialization opportunity to get industry to locate in the country. You know, and you're seeing it with data centers in the US. If you have clean, stable electricity at a reasonable price, people will show up. So just something to think about.
Right, thank
You
you.
know, Paul, that's an excellent point. We see Amazon entering into power purchase agreements with nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania in the US. Microsoft actually appointed a chief nuclear officer, and they've signed a PPA with a fusion company called Helion, which shows you how desperate they are for clean power, considering fusion hasn't made any power yet. Google and other AI providers, it's not just the data centers, but it's also the huge compute you need to run these computing resources that are necessary for AI. So, you know, there might be an opportunity for Bulgaria to court those types of private investors. And, you know, they have, you know, fairly deep pockets if you're looking at Microsoft, Google, or Apple, or Amazon.
I'd like to ask, redirect just a little bit and build on a lot of the things that we've heard. We've heard that lessons are being learned, but must continue to be learned. We've heard that government needs to take on a very strong underwriting role of these programs. And I'd like to ask a question of our banker colleagues. Miloš, perhaps if I start with you, if you're online, if you can hear us. You said something really interesting, which was that throughout COVID and the energy crisis and the Ukrainian conflict, the big banks have been very, very busy, and they have been providing tons of liquidity to their clients. The question I would ask is, these
Sorry,
are clients.
David, I just want to make sure we have our online panel back. Milko, can you try again?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
to cut you off,
I
David.
told
I
you
just want to
once
make
to
sure.
shut up. Anyway, go ahead, David.
Let me pose my question, and then we'll keep the flow going that way. And so Miloš and Suchi, but Valentine as well, at the EBRD, we have heard that the banks, the role that we have heard from you is that you are there to support your clients. You are providing liquidity, and that is almost by definition low-cost liquidity, and it is abundant, as we have heard. If you are the industry then, and this is a question for the bankers, are we in business as usual mode, incrementalism, let the industry work on each project case by case, and at some point there will be a bankable project? Are you, the bankers, simply going to sit back and wait for the right project at the right time? Or do you perhaps, as banks, have a power that you cannot yet wield? And are you ready to change the rules or to help change the rules so that you can reach out and provide support, whereas 10 or 20 years ago, you would not have done so? Miloš, can I start with you?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, actually, thank you for asking that question, because I also wanted to modestly correct the comment Mr. Ivanov made. I think from Citi's perspective, obviously, I wouldn't be on this panel if it wasn't of great interest to us to support the nuclear energy and nuclear industry. I think it goes without saying. I think at the moment, and I was just counting in my head as the question was being posed, I think we are actively participating in 4 nuclear projects and development projects in Europe. And therefore, the answer to your question is that we are not going to be standing still or standing on the sideline and wait for that magical project to come along and tick all the boxes. I don't think the boxes will be ticked just by industry or just by banks. I think it has to be, to Suchi's earlier point and George's fantastic slide, there has to be a bridge between the two sides in order to get closer. And I think the role of the big banks is indeed to to get closer. Because if I look at the Chinese menu of options in terms of financing structures, I don't see much innovation. You know, somebody mentioned ECAs, vendor financing, all sorts of other optionalities on the table, but none of it are really innovative or new. Maybe akin to something that we saw 10, 15 years ago when renewables first came online in larger scale. So I would suspect that we need to work together very closely on individual projects. Some will progress faster, some will progress slower. But I think the role of the big banks is indeed to be on as many of these projects as possible in order also to gather experience and share best practices and come up with innovative solutions which may potentially sit in certain regulatory environments, because UK is very different to Bulgaria, right? Somebody has mentioned it, for example. But yet I think we should be one of the bridges in order to bring that expertise and experience as it comes along in order to provide solutions.
Thank you. Suchi or Valentine?
I mean, I think the one thing I want to point out is the fact that we're here kind of speaks to the fact that we're not sitting on the sidelines. We are, I mean, Milos and I are traditional competitors in terms of our banks, but however, I think we have a unified kind of focus in terms of moving the conversation forward. Maybe, David, I kind of push the question back to you in a way, because I think obviously we can use this in terms of kind of the thought exercise, kind of go through what we think is helpful. And I think I'd mentioned before that I think an advisor serves a really kind of ready purpose to kind of meet some of these like near-term milestones. But in terms of kind of how it would be interesting to hear how we take these thought conversations kind of forward and what you see the next steps are to kind of say, like, maybe like, where do you think we need to be kind of more involved in? Is that allowed? Can I ask a question back to you?
I love that question, Suchi. You set it up perfectly, but I do want to give Valentine a moment.
Oh, please, go ahead.
But thank you. I'll come back to you, Suchi, on that. Valentine, your energy strategy, thank you very much. The key words are, we shall continue to monitor developments. Practically speaking, what does that mean? Is the EBRD going to be a first mover, not in delivering balance sheet necessarily, but in setting projects on the right track so that our friends at Citi, our friends at JP Morgan, and anywhere else can say, oh, these guys have done a good job. We heard from Lazarina, preparation. So can EBRD play that role to help prepare these projects?
It's a very good question, indeed. And yeah, here, when I say we continue to monitor, I would hope that we are more in an active role and engaging, which is what we're also currently doing with our partners. And from the discussion a few minutes ago, I noted that sort of both opportunity, but the issue and conflict of the nuclear new build capacity. We're talking in Bulgaria specifically, but in a broader term in Europe, that it's a balance or conflict, or if I may say so, between security of supply, which is more obligation of the government, but also the question of how we can attract external funding for that project, which are also bankable and commercially attractive. And these two things are not necessarily easy to connect. And we may use our experience, same as Milos mentioned, from the renewable projects early stage, and see how these things can be effectively utilized. My words, not reinventing a bicycle, because a lot of these models, I think they could be used, subject, of course, to, again, back to the political and governmental support. Is it a red card or yellow? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, everybody has got at least one yellow card. But thank you, Valentine. I think we're making progress. We've heard that, I think Vincent, I think Paul, you yourself said the technology is not uninvestable. When projects go south, it is not the technology per se. There's a 60, 70-year history to the industry. Bulgaria has a 50-year history of operating nuclear power plants as well. So it is not the technology. The question, I'd like to move that forward a little bit. What are the enablers then? So we're hearing that the technology is fine. It does need to innovate. It does need to improve. It must always be safe. It must be cheaper. But we heard it is the project structure, and somebody said that. I think, Vince, that was you who said it was the project structure that failed. Who is there? The owner is sitting there who has not done this a year ago, was not building and delivering nuclear power projects and procuring power plants, nuclear power plants. What are the enablers? We cannot, is the panel here saying, government, if there is an unanswered question, give it to the minister, give it to the president.
David, if I could jump in, I honestly think that this issue's been more or less solved. At least in the UK, we've seen what works and what doesn't. Project finance doesn't work. Looking for angel investors who are going to come in and, you know, build your nuclear power plant for you and own it, that hasn't worked. Well, CFD is sort of working, but it's expensive and it keeps the too much risk, and I'm not going to say allocated to the developer. But the RAB model, the regulated asset base, where the construction costs are passed on during construction to the consumer, actually results in interest rates equivalent to what the government pays. And you're not accumulating interest during construction because you're recovering that money as you go along. And this effectively was the way that all of the US plants were financed as well. They were regulated utilities. They had certain prudency obligations, but the money that they needed for infrastructure came from the people who benefited from that infrastructure. So when we're talking government support, it doesn't have to mean government money. It could mean the ability of the developer to recover its costs from the end user. And it ultimately doesn't hit the, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm curious to hear what your kind of focus in terms of successes. I think when you kind of noted that the rate-based model is kind of the primary kind of successful kind of mechanism in terms of kind of cost allocation. I think you mentioned that the cost of financing is equivalent to kind of the sovereign. I mean, I think there's kind of multiple ways of getting kind of costs in line with the sovereign through a variety of different instruments. I think the key kind of interesting nuances in the US, where you have kind of utilities having the rate-based system, is how they kind of allocate for the cost overruns. I mean, there's some precedents where, I mean, people have been paying the overrun cost from kind of variety of different kind of reasons and factors. And if that is a cost that should be kind of moved back to the end user, when in reality it's not really their fault. So I think I'm curious to see kind of how you define success, and also kind of how you kind of think about that as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. There have been some colossally irresponsible projects in the US. The Shoreham nuclear plant that was built on Long Island back in the 80s was built at a cost of over $6 billion US, and it never ran because they didn't have an operating license for it. And they decommissioned it after something like 15 minutes of operation. Lilco, the company that built the plant, wound up having the highest electrical rates in the US for years as a result of that. Your question is, should the consumer bear that cost? And I would say yes, because they are the ones who ultimately would benefit from the upside of it as well. They benefit from the electrical security. And to be honest, that's kind of an extreme outlier. We don't have systems now, licensing systems that could result in that outcome. But I would say, yeah, the consumer should take the risk, but with careful government oversight. In many jurisdictions, there's something called a PUC, a Public Utility Commission, that looks at the prudency of the actions of the owner. And if they're not prudent, they don't get passed on. So on one hand, the RAB is a recipe for disaster if it's just a blank check. It needs to be regulated. There needs to be checks and balances, but the benefits are potentially enormous. And you're not using government money to build your nuclear plant. You're using the consumer's money.
Milko, we want to come to you, but Suchi, I would add another layer to your question, which is what is really innovative in terms of business models in the nuclear industry today is something that didn't exist 20 years ago or 50 years ago, which is that the consumer is now part of the equation at the development stage. So in the UK, Vince, I think you're saying that, and Suchi, you're slightly skeptical, I think, and I would share some of that skepticism that you cannot conscript a consumer who didn't actually have a choice. In the Nordic markets,
We do it in the UK.
well, that's what they're doing, exactly. So, and that's one of the reasons why it's having a little bit of trouble. But in the Nordic market, you have a cooperative model, and we'll come back to you, Ivano, but we would need to go to Milko. There's a cooperative model, and what's important in the socioeconomics, we've talked about the government has this critical role, and we've heard, Paul, you were saying it doesn't have to be just equity. It's actually the socioeconomic value of nuclear energy, and how does the government want to allocate that? And in the Nordics, they have done that through the cooperative system. It's not for everybody, but they have done that through the Mancala system. So I just wanted to add that. We have a new voice in the room. It is the end user, and that has a lot of value. Milko, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think the panel went to a global debate about which model is best to be used in UK, and I believe we need to lend our discussion to the needs of the audience in Bulgaria. And I will try to make a bridge with what Mr. Ivanov said and what the discussion with the bankers recently indicated. So in addition to the nuclear safety regulator, which I believe is present in the room and it has to align the expectations with the design so that to review the regulatory framework, I believe the nuclear energy regulator is missing from that room, and it is a critical regulator for the success of such project, because all these debates about CFD or regulated asset base or PPAs are subject of the energy law and the energy regulator, which needs to participate in that debate. From that perspective, Bulgarian energy regulator has some experience when we talk about regulated asset base, not with nuclear projects, but when we talk about the distribution companies, they are operating on that exactly basis. So the regulator has some understanding how to run such models and how to involve the customer into that. However, this should be done through coordinated efforts, and the experience of many countries developing nuclear programs and nuclear projects shows that you cannot leave the Mr. Ivanov or new build alone. Obviously, there is a need for coordinated government policies. He mentioned several of them, like the dividends or the taxation laws. But in addition to that, I believe the Ministry of Energy and the regulator, the energy regulator, needs to be around the table. The nuclear safety regulator needs to be around the table. So all these shareholders are critical, and they are acting on behalf of the government. Because at the end of the day, the model which will be applied and chosen by Bulgaria is going to impact the customer, is going to impact the cost of capital. Bulgaria is intending to join the Eurozone next year, eventually. This move will, from one side, benefit the cost of capital, but from the other side is a risk of this, let's say, strategic objective of the country, because issuing a sovereign guarantee for such large amount of money when you are preparing to get into the Eurozone, even Bulgaria has the second lowest indebtedness in the European Union, might be seen as by some of the government officials as risk. So all this dialogue needs to be public, needs to be open, and needs to be deeply discussed alongside the development of the EPC contract, which we have heard is underway. So with this, I will end here, David. Thank you.
And to what better way to make a small step in the direction of the public debate than to turn back to the audience for any questions or comments. Okay, we have Ivailo Najdenov and then Emil Kicev.
I apologize for taking the floor for a second time, but two remarks. And I'm grateful to Mr. Kovachev for implying this, but I'm going to say it directly. At the end of the day, we end up to the structure of the electricity market in the given place where we are building the nuclear project. Because as an example, you give RAB, but currently in Bulgaria, we're shifting away from this approach. And currently our market is structured so that we have 80% short-term trading on the day-ahead market. Secondly, it is clear that the end user pays everything at the end. I agree that there are benefits that are harder to evaluate. I just want to shift a bit, once again, the perspective from the newcomers, the industries that would like to develop nuclear projects. It is fine for us to have PPAs with not only nuclear, but any low carbon energy source. I referred to the Exertion Consortium earlier today, and I made remarks about the PPAs in my presentation on Wednesday. But currently, what is the enabler for the heavy industry? The enabler for heavy industry is not only to have electricity, it can provide itself with electricity from the grid, but to have, especially when we have high temperature processes, to have energy source that is reliable and that can produce low carbon steam, hydrogen, and heat in order to support the production of the given industrial facility. And the enabler here is the will and the desire of the owners of the industrial facility to preserve the production in the given place. Because it is easy when you have the pressure to decarbonize, and when you see the costs for decarbonization rising in such a way that they imperil the competitiveness. And I talked about when I showed you the large amount of state aid that is given in Europe. It is up to the owner to decide that, okay, I will try to preserve this facility. I see a solution in nuclear energy, and I'll try to make this work. Otherwise, if you're an international conglomerate, you shut down the facility and start producing your soda ash, your fertilizers, or whatever it might be, anywhere else. So from our viewpoint, that's the main enabler, and we are still figuring out how to make this work.
Okay, these are extremely powerful comments because there needs to be a demand driver for nuclear energy, and we have seen that it exists. I'd like to share a very quick anecdote, which is that, and George, we're going to go to you because you've had your hand up I think several times, and I've missed that, so I apologize. But I'd like to just very quickly share a point with respect to the power of the end user. In one of the Nordic markets, not very long ago, a very important decision maker was asked in Nord Pool, Finland, Sweden, Norway, why are you doing new build nuclear? Because you are clean. You have succeeded in the energy transition. Why? And they said, why? This is not about the energy transition. This is about energy competitiveness and for foreign direct investment and for our industrial base. So it very much reinforces, and this was coming from Nord Pool. George, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. First of all, can you hear me well? Because I heard that my sound was not that great. Okay. This goes back to your question before about who's in the best position to help structure these projects in a way that's going to deliver, projects on time and to budget. And I think it takes a combination of efforts and expertise. First of all, in my mind, the most important thing is repetition. To the extent you can repeat a existing project, something that has been done before, that already lowers your risk significantly. It's the people that are involved. And again, I mentioned that in my opening remarks, but it's so important, I think, is to bring in people that have actually built projects in the past and built them successfully. I've seen this firsthand when we brought in project managers and projects that I've worked in, that people that knew what they were talking about, they've been there before, they knew all the issues. They would come to me and just say, listen, 5 years from now, while we're doing this part of the construction, this is going to be the problem that we're going to be facing. How are the contracts structured for that thing? I need this clarity. And it gets to this granularity of this very specific things that will tell you, I know what's going to happen. And that makes a big difference into these projects. And then again, to be talking to the different stakeholders and people that are involved in the project, to listen to what they have to say. And again, I'll give another example where the owner had a particular view about how things should be done and went to one of the potential vendors, and the vendor said, listen, I can do that. That's fine. But let me tell you what I've done before, and it has been successful. So maybe you want to rethink how you want to do this. And after the owner looked at this, they realized this was a better solution. So keeping an open mind about how to structure things and listening to your vendors, listening to operators, to listen to other people that are going to be involved in the project, I think is going to be important into lowering the risk. So to summarize out that, I think all that expertise from the technical side, from the financial side, from the legal side, is bring that experience back to make sure that you have the solution, which will definitely have to be bespoke for your project. That's it.
Excellent points.
Mr. Kichev.
We have a question from the audience.
Maybe, I don't know, to reduce subject to qualitative assessment and to go to quantitative assessment. And some digits, I like digits. And technology and money and people representing technology and people representing the money. We are here. Okay, thanks. And in US Atomic Act public in 1954 mentioned some digit. 40 years lifetime period of nuclear reactors and 15 years for trying acceptable period for return the investment. Now we are 2024. Does for people with the money, this 15 or what is the period for acceptable for you, giving let's say left boundary 14 billion for 2 units up to right boundary 45 billion for 2 units in Kozloduy site. What is for people with the money, the acceptable period, put this money and trying to the investment return? Thank you.
So I think this is a great question that goes probably best addressed to our banker colleagues, which is, I think it's about the payback period. And I might add to that question, which is, ladies and gentlemen in the financial community, is there such thing as evergreen finance? for any business, and could that apply to technology? We heard about there's tons of liquidity that the banks are mobilizing for their clients. Why not nuclear? Is that a possible target? And what is the target in terms of payback period, if there has to be one?
David, if I may jump before the bankers. Indeed, the US Exim recently extended the repayment period to 22 years of their loans. So I think Mr. Kitchev needs to know that one, and maybe this indicates also how the commercial banks will react. Sushi, you have, sorry about jumping on you.
No. I was curious. Like I mean, I have yet to work on an evergreen facility in any transaction. So I am curious if Milos has had experience on his side. I think that any sector, we look at it on a project level basis. Obviously, we have seen more renewables. That doesn't necessarily mean we don't do thorough diligence. In terms of the terms, have a deal that's seen as kind of well structured. So I would say, David, I mean, I think that we still operate very much on a project by project basis through any sector, though you can obviously argue that for some asset classes, the terms have become more and more aggressive as more kind of banks have entered the market. But yeah, Milos, I would love to hear your views as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Sushi. I think there's no doubt that project of this size will require a longer term view. We bankers would love to shorten it, right? But I think there is a widespread recognition that we are looking at beyond 12, 15, even 20 years, and someone mentioned 22. That's just the reality of the beast, right? And as Sushi mentioned, I think it has to be viewed on a case-by-case basis because, again, while we are looking at 4 different projects at the moment in the nuclear space, they're in different jurisdictions under different regulatory environments and therefore viewed differently on a case-by-case. So I'm afraid I'm not trying to avoid the answer. I'm just trying to say that there is a recognition of the long-term nature of these projects and the payback periods. But to give you an answer to exact number, I can't on this call.
But thank you. Thank you, Milos and Suchi and Milko. Paul?
I think it's important to understand that all money is not the same, right? So you heard mention that export credit agency debt is 22 years in terms of repayment, which means when you think about a drawdown cycle, you're looking at 27-year money maybe. But pension funds, for example, are long-term investors. They don't want to come in during construction. They'll come in during operation. We're seeing green bond financing now in nuclear, not yet for new build, but we've seen 5 issuances now from Bruce Power doing 2 bond issuances that were oversubscribed by 6x, OPG, TVO, EDF, Constellation. They're all doing green bond issuances. And when you look at the ESG market, you're seeing actually a pullback in ESG equity funds right now, but ESG bond funds are doing really, really well. I mean, you're seeing a tremendous appetite in the bond market. So it's important to recognize, again, the different risk periods within a nuclear project and then matching the available money to those periods. The investment funds, a lot of them have tenors of like 5 years. So they're not suitable for nuclear plant development. So again, there's a lot of money out there, but it's different types of money, and you have to start matching it to the periods of time that you need it. And that's again where you go back to governments maybe being the gap filler. Somebody mentioned earlier, and I mentioned it in my presentation, overrun risk. Who's going to cover that? That's really expensive money. Could the government, trying to lower the cost of capital by the government coming in, no one wants to take that risk. Somebody has to. So who can be the cheapest money? It's government. So again, distinguish between your sources of money and then build your financing plan accordingly.
Yep.
Thank you, Paul. And both the payback period and to some extent the cost overrun risk have to do with how much are we looking for here. And I think this is what Lazarina was mentioning in her remarks at the beginning that and that bridges also this aspect of planning and project preparation. How do you know how much is it going to cost? What do you need to do in order to know how much is it that you need to finance?
Yes, difficult question. We need to know a lot and everything. First of all, and now, yes, of course. First of all, we need very clear scope definition. What we are gonna do from all aspects. It's not only contractors that are gonna build the plant, but also the owner, which should develop beside the plant, the infrastructure, the operational personnel, and many other aspects of the costs. So this is the first point, very, very clear scope definition. Then the second point, what I see for the good cost estimate is the clear definition of boundaries between different parties in this game. Who is going to deliver what? And what will be the interfaces? When I say this, for example, huge example for me is, for example, who is going to be responsible to deliver the first fuel core? Whether this is going to be the contractor, technology vendor, or this is going to be a separate contract. And these are points which are important and important to know from the very beginning, because all this will impact the overnight costs. Speaking about the overnight costs, I should say that besides of them, there is a significant portion of time-dependent costs. Escalation is important. Such projects will never come without with a price defined until the end. So escalation is important, and this is something which should be negotiated between the owner and the contractor, because these are formulas. In general, this depends on macroeconomic development and situation in the country of origin, in the host country. But at the end, it's also a matter of determination in the contract. And finally, financial costs, which are important. And now something that usually we spoke during the break with Dave, that really very huge cost overruns are found during the projects, despite of the lessons learned. And we see this improved cost estimates as one of the options to really reduce the risk of cost overruns. Another option is to put a, how to say, a reasonable but sufficient contingency. Very important issue, and there are several techniques to define the contingencies, including with Monte Carlo analysis. But this is important, and this is also, I think, important for the banks to know that we plan the project in a very, very reliable way. And another point to say that one thing is the total costs. They are huge. Another thing which is important, and we see it's their distribution during the years, both as equity and as credit. Why this is important? If it is not done properly, or in case of delays, all these cash flows should be redistributed again, which can really complicate the communications with the banks, may require additional agreements, which are again money and time. And this is the point I wanted also to highlight. Very distribution in the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And actually, Lazarina, as we get to the close of this panel, that is actually the boiler room of everything we're talking about. It's the cost model, it's the contingencies, it's the schedule. And that drives the value proposition, that drives the finance plan, that drives the PPA, the tariff, the strike price, the RAB price, whatever it is. Can we, Peter, if you allow me, Can we try a little survey with the audience whereby, Lazarina, you are the expert of all of us on contingency, and you have seen numerous different types of pressurized water reactor large-scale projects. The question I'd like to ask the audience, and then I'd like you to score the audience, is what is the right level of contingency? What is an accurate level of owner contingency for a nuclear new build plant at FID? Is that a fair question? Can we,
I
does
think we
anybody
should
want to?
maybe put some
Okay.
markers and
So actually, yeah.
over
and-
under.
So I'll keep on going with this. So when I was in banking, which was a long time ago, but, and maybe our banker colleagues will correct me, but I was doing wind farms with 3% contingency. A CCGT had about 5% contingency in the Gulf countries. And I was reading a report on Olympic Games contingencies that are in the 10 to 20% range officially, but in practice, the outturn costs are 159% contingency for the Olympic Games. So somewhere between 159, Olympic Games scale overruns or wind farm overruns. Any guesses?
Maybe by show of hands, over under 30%, under 30%. No.
David,
Or
I think the
pessimistic.
thing,
Okay, yes, I was hoping that you would raise your hand.
I think it depends on whether we're talking about the first of a kind of a design, or if you're talking about the nth of a kind. Because we've seen in the industry, Westinghouse, by the time they built Sizewell B, I think it went commercial in 1991. I mean, it was a well-oiled machine. It was on time, it was on budget. And that's because they had been doing the same design for quite some time. We don't have that anymore. We've forgotten as an industry how to build nuclear plants. Well, not everybody. The Team Korea still knows. But it'll get better. But it's going to take time. So it all depends on where you are in the queue. And I think the AP1000 has enough runtime now that you'll start to see fewer and fewer problems and lower contingency. So it should go down over time.
I have to admit, Vincent, that a repetition of the project definitely is a remedy for not going to that nightmare with cost overruns and schedule delays. So definitely, as soon as we have not only talking about any nuclear renaissance, but we see that countries investing in nuclear technologies, and also they choose one and the same technology in different states, definitely they'll only benefit from that, because repetition would decrease the risk, would decrease the costs.
Thank you. And I think it seems fitting that with your remarks, we will call the end of today's panel. I want to thank very deeply, express our gratitude to all our panelists, both online and here in person. Please join me in thanking them. And I want to thank my co-moderator, David, for making the trip, for putting in all the effort. Thank you, David. With that, I believe it is actually time to close the conference. I'll ask Mr. Stanislav Georgiev to take over. We won't have any break now. We'll just have the closing and then lunch, correct? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to the online panelists. I think you can stay if you want to for the final remarks, the closing remarks for the conference. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Добър ден на всички колеги, гости, панелисти. Както се казва, 3 дни минаха бързо и неусетно. Времето беше хубаво, но съм силно изненадан колко много хора има и в залата, а не на плажа. Въпреки че времето за плаж е много хубаво. Аз лично това, което проследих през тези 2 дни и половина, с изключителен интерес следа представянето и срещите на нашите колеги от BulAtom с основните заподозрени, които ще трябва да изградат атомна централа Уестингхаус и Hyundai, в присъствието на собственика, който трябва да получи централата, нови мощности АЕЦ Козлодуй. Колегите се запознаха с всички, поне аз така си мисля, основни проблеми, които стоят пред тях, не пред доставчиците на технологията, защото техната задача беше да представят условията, при които трябва да изграждаме централата, по начина, по който трябва да се развият компаниите и на всичко това, което те очакват от нас като страна в лицето на собственика и държавата ни, в лицето на всички български инженерни, монтажни и ремонтни компании и строителни, да не ги забравяме, защото те са много важни в изграждането на атомна централата, както се казва, да впрегнем усилия, да повишиме квалификацията си, тъй като огромно количество инженерен персонал е необходимо както в самия състав на нови мощности, така с многото подредени консултанти, които трябва да му съдействат за контрол на проекта от първа, как се вика, линийка, която се чертае на листа, докато тя влезе в търговска експлоатация, за да може да се подготвят двата тип кадри, едните кадри, които разбират от инвестиции и другите кадри, които могат да експлоатират атомна централа. Те са два различни кадри. Когато се завърши и се включи търговска експлоатация централата, всички тези кадри, които са работили като проектанти от страна на доставчиците и от страна на собственика на централата, те се превръщат в инженерни компании, които инженерни технически поддържат тази атомна централа в продължение на целия й живот. Няма ядрен обект или въобще сложен технически обект в света, в който като го построите, пускате го и той вече няма никакви проблеми. Такова нещо не съществува. Тъй като за нашата страна основен източник на базова енергия в близко бъдеще, под близко бъдеще разбирам минимум 30-50 години е ядрената енергетика и тя се явява гръбнака на нашата икономика и както се казва, основата за устойчивото развитие на живота ни, като хора, които да живеем в тази страна. Нашата общност от BulAtom ще положи всички усилия първо да участваме в този проект, да бъдем на ниво на доставчиците на технологии и строителя на централата, на ниво на собственика, защото колегите от АЕЦ Козлодуй и собственика разполагат с колеги от АЕЦ Козлодуй, които ние познаваме добре, но трябва непрекъснато да повишаваме нивото си като инженерно познание и като съвременни технологии, както в строителството, както в IT технологията, както в нивото на безопасност, така и за киберсигурност, която всеки ден става все по-актуална и по-актуална и ние трябва да си пазим нашите национални обекти, които всъщност поддържат и хранят държавата ни. В това отношение изключително много се надявам, че младите хора ще тръгнат по нашия път, ще научат нещо от това, което ние сме научили за предишните 30, 40, 50 години. Вече се каза няколко пъти, че България има опит 50 години вече в експлоатация на атомни централи. Въпреки прекъсването, когато сме тръгвали проект нов инвестиционен спирал, ние в този лъкатушец процес сме успяли да натрупаме знание как да се структурира един такъв проект и хубаво да бъде предаден, използван и да бъде развит в по-добра светлина, естествено, за да се случи. Аз много пъти съм цитирал различни числа, но пак ще ги повторя, за да бъда оттекчителен, но за да бъда разбран. Аз се надявам, че от страна на доставчиците, с всички изпълнители и строители и технолозите, те са около 15 000 човека, от които минимум 1000 човека са инженерен състав. От страна на собственика са минимум около 300 човека негов персонал личен и най-малко около 350 човека, които съдействат това нещо да се случва и все високотехнологични познания. Хората, които могат да бъдат от страна на собственика, те не трябва да имат по-малко от 15 годишен опит в тази област, в различните области. Особено в понятието безопасност, които двата документа, които дават право една атомна централа да има въобще, това се казва техническа обосновка на безопасност и двата вида вероятностни анализ, анализ ниво 1 и ниво 2, те са част от тази техническа обосновка. Без тя да бъде адекватна и да отговаря на съвременните изисквания, не може да пуснете и да включите в експлоатация ядрено съоръжение. Всичко останало може да ви е перфектно, централата да изглежда точно като на проекта, ама да не е безопасна. Това не трябва да го допускаме, защото това са огромни, огромни средства, които би могла да загуби българската икономика, държавата ни, тъй като в крайна сметка Нови мощности АЕЦ Козлодуй е държавна компания, 100%, и ние разчитаме за подкрепата на държавата. Без подкрепата на държавата може да бъде сигурен, че не може да направим и оградата на централата. Това е много съществен момент. Ние като част от това общество и част от икономиката ни, които се поддържаме, искаме да развиваме новата ядрена мощност, сме част от решението на беземисионния транспорт, който е основната задача на държавата ни да достигне 50-55 година в мястото, където ние след 50-та година трябва да имаме 4 работещи ядрени блока големи, и не на празно казвам, че трябва да бъдат развити много вейтата и соларите и вятъра и малките модулни реактори, големите наши компании, които произвеждат от тежката металургия, индустрия, химия, те могат да се обърнат към такива и да изградат локални мощности, тъй като на нас ни предстои огромно предизвикателство като енергия, която да заместиме въглеводородите в транспорта. Това е решението и ние сме част от това решение, за което аз смятам, че е огромно предизвикателство и огромна възможност. Искам да благодаря на всички колеги, които се отзоваха, присъстваха, изнесаха много интересни доклади, разказаха за различни моменти, които трябва да решаваме. Накрая, от което искам да изкажа, технически проблеми има всевъзможни. Но ако не решиме финансовия, не е лошо да не започваме. Значи, докато, както се казва, не си намерил парите, не започвай нищо да строиш, защото нещо, което го строиш без да си намерил парите, обикновено да го плащаш 2,5 пъти. Благодаря ви за вниманието и ви желая успех на всички и попътен вятър по правенето на новата ядрена мощност. Благодаря още веднъж.